Well, it's gone 10 o'clock, so I think we should start. Hi, I'm Jeremy Cooper. This is part 2 of Cosmetic Minimally Invasive Dentistry. Not a lot has changed in the last week, but we've heard a little more about maybe we'll be starting in July, but that remains to be seen. Last week was more of my philosophy of doing as little as possible and talked a little bit about composites and bonding. And perhaps the overall message I really want to get through to people is a personal quest to ask you to really question everything you hear from other dentists, lecturers, the reps that come to visit you, just everything, question it. Because my own personal belief is that a lot of the time, you know, people make claims and they're not substantiated. And it all comes down, as I said last week, it's evidence-based and whose evidence. So I am a little critical of that. Today we're going to be talking about some clinical techniques, air abrasion and the U-veneer. And I'll say a little bit about the economics of it at the end of the presentation. So let's just touch my screen and we can, there. Before I do that, I want to highlight, since I'm really talking predominantly, I think, to a British audience, about Confidential, and some of you may know that I'm the chairman of this particular charity, and Confidential offers you help with problems you may have if you're anxious about something, and it's a 24/7 helpline that's available, so you can talk anonymously to one of our volunteer dentists and they will listen to you. We're non-judgmental, we're not even directive. We can send people to signpost them rather to other organizations. But if you are suffering, and particularly at this time with COVID-19, having problems and you want to talk over a problem, we're there to listen and we're there 24/7. And the number is 0333 987 5158. That's 0333 987 5158. And you can find our number also on the Mental Dental Facebook group too. So that's just, if anybody wants help, it is there for you. So moving on from that, yeah, I last time showed you a depiction of a virus from Changi Airport in Singapore. And it seems that I seem to have, a bit like Nostradamus, forecast this, because there you are, I was in MoMA in 2019 at Greater New York Dental Meeting, and there's another kind of depiction of a virus in a sculpture there at the Museum of Modern Art there. And we are in that strange world. And in the last 12 months, there I was in what's called the Painted Hills of Idaho. And it's a whole landscape around there. And it really does feel as though you're not on this earth. And as you travel around Idaho, there's another place I came across called the Craters of the Moon National Park. And it really was as though you're on a different planet. And I think we all are at the moment. So, no more ado. Let's talk a little bit about layering of composite. And I asked the question, why? Because you're doing it already. You're layering composites. And when we're talking about layering composite here, I'm really referring to enamel and dentine composites. And we're all meant to be layering our composites in 2mm increments. And I mentioned last time about the isolation is very important, but I don't think the rubber dam is the be all and end all. It makes your life easier, but it doesn't 100% stop you from getting contamination. And why do composites fail? Contamination, certainly. And, you know, don't get me wrong, if you are getting contamination with blood and saliva into your cavities, then sure, things are going to fail. But if we're taking steps and making sure that our cavities are kept moisture free and everything is done correctly, then I don't think that the rubber dam is as important, certainly, as the matrix or the matrix band that you're using, particularly with posterior composites there. And that's what provides your isolation, if you like, to the cavity. So why do composites fail? You can talk about shrinkage, you can talk about the fact that, and I think one of the biggest reasons is something that was pointed out to me in the last couple of years, it's the direction of the beam of your light, or the fact that you're curing too thick an amount of composite. I think we're all guilty of that. I think, do we actually cure 2 millimeters all the time? I have my doubts. And that may be one of the reasons that the composite isn't being cured, either because the angle of the beam isn't correct and it's angled sometimes, and you can be, if you're angling your light cure and the light's not going, as we know, it goes in straight lines and you're not curing it, that can be a reason that your composites perhaps fail. Sure, they'll self-cure over a period of time anyway, but not fully. And that is why I believe that we have one of the reasons for failure of composites. And I think it's even more pronounced with the bulk fills, because there we're curing 4 or 5 millimeter amounts of composite. And there are some who claim you can cure even more than that. I think Easy Fill, they say that you can cure even larger thicknesses of composite. So just be aware of that. But when we talk about layering of composites, I'm sure many of you know about the silicone putty technique. And for those who aren't aware, you just get a lump of silicone putty and you put it on 3 to 3 or 4 to 4, perhaps, you know, extend it round. And then you take your silicone set putty after you've put it on, you're not using a tray, and you cut it in two, literally down the center, and you put in the back part into the mouth. And then you layer your composite with your dentine and your enamel composites. And some of you may even get a model made and use a shut down stent to the clear plastic and cut that down the middle and put one of those in. The whole idea is then you, from the palatal aspect, are building up your composite in increments, in layers, and you're producing a great result. I find it very difficult, but you may find it easy. And if you can not only do it well, but charge the correct amount of fee to make it viable, and I'll come back to time again, as I did last time, being very important, great, do it. I find it very demanding, and I'm not sure I can charge a fee that is okay with my patients for the amount of time I will have to put in for it. And I really want you to think about this, because I find that putting the matrix in and not getting composite overhangs mesially and distally, difficult. And good luck to you if you manage that okay. I find it demanding. And so I asked the question, are there easier and quicker techniques that you can get comparable results? And I'll leave that to you to decide. Never forget, patients will pay more for anterior restorations if you educate. I don't mind using the word sell it correctly. Then sure, any anterior restorations are prepared to pay for, but it is a consideration. And I've got no problems if people are using silicone putty or shut down stents, and maybe it is the gold standard. But I think it's very easy, in my hands certainly, to get mesial and distal overhangs. So I'm not a great fan of it. This is one material, Amaris by Voco, and I say this because people often ask, what should I use and why do I like this particular material? I took part in the clinical trials for another great material called Aura by SDI. Great material, nothing against it. And it's quite simply that this works out more economic because there are only 5, they call them opaque shades. They're actually dentine shades. And with Aura, you get 7, and there are lots of systems out there. You know, there's the first ones was Rembrandt. And I mean, there's numerous systems now because, as you know, all companies follow the, you know, one does it and then everyone follows suit. And they're all good, I'm sure. You know, when you're using quality materials, they all work. But with Aura, I found 7 shades increases the expense. And to be fair to you, and I'll talk a little bit about this, I do things which the average probably don't do. And I'll talk a little bit about that later when it comes to shades. But for the most part, having 5 dentine shades is more than adequate. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit later. You've got 3 enamel shades. Most of the dentine and enamel composites will have 3 shades. And you have a light, a more neutral, and a dark shade as well. And so your combinations that you're going to use, you've got those, and it really depends on these things that matter, you know what you choose, and it's familiarity of a system. And the thing I particularly like about this system is you have 2 flowables in your initial kit, and they're very, very useful, and I've found uses for both of them, both the opaque and the highly translucent one. And they're obviously less filled because they're flowable. And they're all these nano hybrids. They're 80% filled as opposed to 87% for Grandiosa. They're all purpose, 1 shade. Can you use Grandiosa anteriorly? Absolutely. And particularly in NHS practice, you may very well do that rather than, you know, using Amaris, which is more expensive to use, and having the 2 shades requires more initial expense as well, you know, with all the different combinations. And the flowable is only 64% shade filled. So that's the material I use, and it's all this nano hybrid technology. And people will say, well, would you use this for a premolar, a molar? Being honest with you, no, I won't. I see some questions are coming, but we'll take those at the end. I'm not going to interrupt myself. So when you're using it, why would you want to use Amaris at the posterior region? 1, the further you go back, obviously, the less likely you are to see it. You might use Amaris on certainly the buccals of 4 and 5s and things, but would I use it for an MOD on a premolar? No. 1, it won't wear as well. Whether it's highly significant, I don't know, it's only 80% as opposed to 87% filled. It may have a slightly increased wear. But it really comes on how you use these. You're putting a dentine and you're putting an enamel composite on top. And unless you're using something like the stamp technique, then as soon as you put your composite in, otherwise we're adjusting, as you know, you put your composite and you have to adjust the occlusion. So if you're using this technique correctly with the correct thicknesses of material, it's very difficult to do, because how can you judge when you're initially putting it in and then afterwards having to adjust the occlusion? You'll have taken away your enamel part of your composite. So I would say I never use this for posterior restorations, and I wouldn't even use it if there was no opposing dentition. So it is really for anterior composites. Little bit about shade selection. This is, I don't mean to tell you to suck eggs. I don't mean to tell you to, you know, we're all doing this, but, you know, it is obvious. Look at your composites under different lights, not just your surgery light, certainly not. Take your surgery light away, you've got daylight. you know, look at it through daylight. Certainly look at it, get yourselves one of those if you have got fluorescent tubes, a daylight fluorescent tube. So at least you've got some semblance of naturalness, particularly if you're working without, whether or no windows, it's a dark day, or as the evenings draw in. And this was one fact I'd never even thought about. And it was brought to my attention as I was doing the clinical trials and everything. I went to France and I was looking at this aura, and I met with a Professor Salomon, and took me through colour dentistry. And he said 95% of the colour of a tooth comes through the dentine. Something I'd never really thought about. Only 5% through the enamel. And that really goes home to telling you one of the biggest failures that people make when doing enamel and dentine composite is they make the enamel too thick. And why many people give it up and go back to a single shade? Because when they put on they choose the right dentine color, they put on then the enamel. It's too thick, they get the wrong color. Because remember, so likely the enamel goes down to 0.3 of a millimeter. And you're better than I am if you can really judge that 0.3 to 0.5 of a millimeter. And, you know, together with acid erosion and everything, it probably goes thinner than that. And we know, obviously, towards the gingival restoration, you're often right through the enamel and you're right through just to the dentine. And so it's important to understand that, if you like, the enamel composites are the icing on the cake. It really is the dentine that determines the color. And so when you're using those enamel composites, the different 3 shades, does it really matter? Subtle is the word I'd use. It just provides that little nuance of color, but it really is the dentine you've got to get right. The enamel will very slightly alter it if you're using it in the correct shades. And I put this up because when I took part in the initial trials with Aura, I got on the phone even to Australia, and I said to them, you're making a big mistake. You're making a terrible mistake. You are not doing them in Vita. And they've now introduced some of their range into Vita shades. They're all-purpose ones, and they've actually done that. But I actually was wrong, because I was conditioned. I talked about conditioning last time. And if you remember, I showed a picture of a Dalek telling you that you were conditioned. And I apologize today because I've gone against social distancing as somebody is actually joining us for the presentation. And thank you. But in all seriousness, don't forget that. Don't be conditioned to thinking. You are artists now, or trying to be an artist. And I told you last time, I'm an amateur artist. But try not to be conditioned, because, I mean, many of my generation would look at somebody and say A3, A3.5, etc. When you look at somebody, you know the color. When you're doing this type of work, try and think like an artist. One of the things I do, wasn't told to me, but they're all nanohybrid composites. Sometimes if I can't get the right shade with the 5 dentine shades that Amaris gives you, I know that Grandioso has many different shades, and I sometimes will mix and match. You know, it's obvious to me. They're all nanohybrids, so then use them. I'm not sure whether you should use composites from different manufacturers. You've got to be a bit careful. Most of them are probably okay to mix, but there are some that use quinolones and various things that when you're setting them, so you can be a bit careful if your light doesn't set them, unless you have their particular light. And I'm thinking really of Ivoclar there. But certainly using Vocos, Grandioso and Amaris, I sometimes do mix them to get the right nuances of shade. Particularly, remember, teeth aren't monolithic blocks, and that's one of the problems you have really with CAD cams when you're doing restorations that they're often monolithic, and you have to try and produce some naturalness. So I think that technology will improve as time goes on, and is improving now. So mix and match, that's my word, you know, start trying to think like an artist, even if I say an amateur artist. So here's a clinical case, and think what you're doing. If you've got there a couple of centrals and she was worried about the jagged edge, well, what are you going to use there? Are you going to use a dentine composite? Absolutely not. You're just going to add a little bit of, that's the TN composite, just add a bit of incisal edge to it. And, you know, finish restoration, fine. Patient's happy, easy to do. And there isn't anybody who couldn't do that, but you're not going to start using a dentine composite because there's no dentine missing. And I mentioned about who needs the silicone putty technique. And here's a restoration, and I made some basic mistakes here. This lady was referred to me, and that was a problem. She said the restoration kept coming loose, and there it is as I moved it down. She said it kept moving. And she went back to the dentist, and I'm not exaggerating, 4 or 5 times. And then a friend told her she had given up on this particular person and said, go and see Jeremy. And I said, fine, come in. And I did what we shouldn't do. I looked at this case and just pushed it back. And I said, yes, look at those incisors at the bottom. Yes, Paul will be very happy with me. I know this is an occlusal problem. It obviously is an occlusal and it's moving it, and that's what's gone wrong, hasn't it? Yeah, I didn't even need to look, did I? And I'd made that mistake. I jumped in, both feet, made a decision, a determination, if you like, what the cause of the failure was. See, I was wrong. Even in protrusion, there was it wasn't nothing to do with it. So what had gone wrong? I'd made a basic mistake. I hadn't actually communicated with the patient. I'd assumed I knew what was wrong by just looking. And actually, it was actually her description of what was going on. She'd go back to this dentist, I suppose, and if you like, he'd got it wrong in the first go. He probably, whether he hadn't cured it, etched, bonded correctly, and it got contaminated, whatever the failure. And all the person was doing was every time they come, you know, he thought, well, I've earned my money or I'm busy, slapped on a bit more bond. Well, these, you know, you can use these all bonds, and you don't have to use them in 2, you know, with etch and bond. I can just put it in 1. Just put a bit of bond on, put a bit of composite, and fine. So in other words, it's bond on bond on bond. And quite often, obviously, the clinical technique would come into it, but it kept failing. And obviously, when you've got a problem like that, it's no good just putting a bit more bond and on top of another bond. It's going to fail. And so aerobrate it. No local here. And, you know, I just aerobrate it. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. And you can see what aerobrasion does. It looks like acid etch on the enamel. It produces this white frosty appearance. And I'll talk about retention afterwards. And there is the cavity. And so I etch as well. Please, you know my feelings about rubber dam. I do use it, but I think it's going to get in my way. Maybe I don't use it, or if I'm happy with the isolation it can do. So I'll etch and I'll bond, because you do get better etching. And here's a perfect, this was just for effect, but if you look at it, that is now not to use a light. I just did it to say after that I would cure it. You need to cure from different positions if you're using your light to make sure that it will also cure properly. Light goes in straight lines. Never forget it. So I chose my enamel and I chose my dentine composite. And I put in my first increment, a couple of millimeters, or so I thought, because that's it, so I thought. I don't know, but I'm putting it in, I reckoned it was 4 or 5 millimeters there, put my first increment and then cure it. And then I put my second increment and I had one of those eureka moments. And it's something I do. It's, you know, if I'm using enamel and dentine composites, I got there and I thought, because I had that problem of too thick enamel composite. So I just got a smidgen. I put it on the uncured second layer of my enamel, of my dentine composite. So I put a tiny little bit and then just pulled it across and finished it. And yeah, and it was good. I always say one of the little things, and you never forget this, dentists don't often do it. They sometimes forget. I know if you go at the composite course, they'll always tell you to do it. Just make sure that you put some to break the light up. So otherwise, I always think they reflect a bit too much. So just before you actually polish, just roughen a little bit the surface, if you like, just to take the light away, because you can see from the other teeth there and the other centrals, you know, they're not all beautiful, flat, glossy teeth. And, you know, just take the light out by just roughening with your finishing burr before you perhaps use your polishers. And happy patients and, you know, natural appearance. I wasn't going to really talk much about other products, but I'm going to recommend this. It's from the cheaper end of the market, 245 quid and VAT, premium plus. So what can I tell you about this light? Why do I like it? It's LED. It's from China. You mustn't buy from China. They're garbage. They're rubbish. Are they? I'll tell you a little bit about this light. I played with it once at one of the exhibitions and I thought, wow, it really cures, really thick, to about a centimetre. I sent it to a laboratory for a company, I'm not going to say who tested it, a very, let's say, reputable composite manufacturer, who even manufactured their own lights. And they were incredibly impressed with it. Yes, it was a very good light, came back the message. An extremely good product. So I recommended it. I then happened to go to the United States, and one of the larger, not the largest, but one of the larger dental wholesalers in the United States had on their stand this light. It wasn't called Premium Plus, it was under their own name, and they were selling it not for £245, about $800–900 US. I'll leave you lot to do the conversion, but probably about £600–700 or something. Got me interested. But not only that, they also had done their research and had papers to prove it. And we all know the daddy of all curing lights, I think is agreed, it's the Velo by Ultradent. The one they say you can drop. You can't drop this. The results were extraordinarily good. So much so when I took it to Ultradent, they kind of took a double take. Some say if you come away from the tooth, your radiance slightly drops, but it is an extremely good light. It's got a built-in light meter. You can see at the bottom. So lights do matter. And I love it because it's got a tack set. So it goes on for a split second, particularly when you're fitting your crowns and you don't want it to set completely. So I will say to you all, that's something to consider. Although the tack set, to be honest, goes on for a second, it's too long. I've told them that. They really need to lessen the time, because if you have it on tack set to set a crown, I literally move it from the buccal to the lingual or palatal, you know, in one movement. But during that second, if I leave it on for a second on one surface, it actually goes a bit too hard. So that's it. But it's a fabulous light with different modes and different ramps. And I really do recommend it. And it's, as I say, an extremely good, durable light. So that's just my tip of the day. So I've seen it tested now independently by two different, one company that sells it under its own label, but also by a very respected composite manufacturer. And I talk a little bit about finishing. There are lots of different things here, and I've got others, Astropoles I often use. But the daddy, the gold standard, ASAP, top left, clinician's choice, sold by Optident. And I want to tell you, I have no, formal links or anything, links or being paid or anything for anything I recommend it. They come out from the heart, nothing more. We work with sometimes with Voco, as I say in this presentation, and also give Voco. I'll say that Voco, yeah, they're okay. Bread and butter, not a patch on ASAP. Why do I like ASAP? And I nearly bought, and I was persuaded by somebody at Optident, go on, get them. And what they will do, besides polishing composite, they'll polish ceramic. And with ceramic, after you adjust them, you got your crown and then it got that dull matte, whatever you use. No, you can get to a gloss with this very easily. So you use their protocols, using one, then the other, the mauve one, and then it goes to like a pinky or color, and you just do it and you'll get back to a gloss. And I think you can also autoclave them, and they will go, rather than fall apart like Astropoles after a few uses. If you put them through an autoclave, these will go in your vacuum autoclave and they'll go time and time and time again. And they don't just fall apart. And if you like, they're value. And I really recommend, because they're a pretty price for a box of those. And, I will use different finishes. I'm using their Kulza, but for my initial, and the one on the top right is Premier, and they have some nice polishing pastes as well as the discs. But my bread and butter now is ASAP, and I really do recommend those for finishing composite. If you really want to go into the crazy levels, then you're going to buy these kind of products, and there are lots on the market, basically flowables in different colors, blues. Oh, when would I ever use a blue? And you can mix these like an artist's palette. And particularly if you are matching into a dentition, you might want to put in some of the white shades to mimic white spots, if brown spot lesions, if that's what's on the other teeth. But it brings me to one paper I wrote, and looking at things from the patient's perspective and the dentist's perspective are two different things. And even the greats who do the most incredible work, what do they do with their MODs and their DO composites on their posterior teeth? You put in brown fissures, don't you? Why? Well, it looks more natural, doesn't it? If you ever questioned a patient, if you do one, can you take away those brown fissures? But, when I first play, and I like to show slides, my first case, I like to show you the first case I ever did with these on a posterior tooth, and it's pretty naff. I'm not shy. Yeah, it was a very discolored tooth, so she was happy afterwards, and I was just trying these things out. That's not particularly good now at Ultima Technique, a lot less brown, and mix it with other things and play around. But yeah, these things are to play with, and if you really want to subtly use them on your cases, do so. They are, again, the icing on the cake. But around posterior teeth, who wants brown fissures? They're more likely to tell you to sandblast or aerobrade your occlusal surface and produce your nice white fissures like the crown. They don't want the brown. They don't want the orange. But all the greats, and I've seen them almost without exception, they'll do that. They'll put the brown orange fissures in. So it brings me on to my Greater New York. And I told you, I go to New York. I love the meeting for a variety of lectures and everything else. And I had my moment in the spotlight as I became the only UK representative that year last year to actually lecture there. And what's amazing is that I was the only UK lecturer at that meeting. there's 53 to 54,000 people there. It's quite phenomenal that there aren't more UK lecturers over at that meeting, and it's really worth going. So I was there and I met with good old Liberty, and we had our usual chat, and I was saying, what's new at the exhibition? She says, go down Ultradent. So I went down Ultradent. She said, and have a look at these U veneers. So I went down and I chatted to one of the reps and I said, what are these things? And she said, yeah, they put composite underneath and you can produce veneers. I said, great. But I am into layering of composite. I bet you can't do that. I don't know. That was the answer I got back. But I know somebody who can tell you all about them. And I was introduced to this lady, and she had me at the end of her finger. She had a lovely accent. She's from Israel, but she practiced in Australia. And she invented them. And she had me mesmerized under her spell. And we talked composites for, must have been an hour. And she said, do you know what? I'm going to send you some. And true to her words, Sigal sent me a kit. And these things are normally hundreds of pounds, sold by Optodent and Henry Schein. And I bet most people will balk when they think, I'm not buying those. Until you see what they can do, within a few cases, considering what you would pay for lab fees, for well-made veneers and everything, it pays for itself. And you can, as I'll show you in a second with the advantages and disadvantages, they are amazing things. And I promised, if I like them, I'd write you a paper. One paper, another paper. I've written a few papers and it's been reprinted in different journals. And I didn't just write one, I wrote a completely different paper on them. And I really do think they're a useful addition in your practice. And that's why I like them. So they are a template system, vacuum autoclavable, again and again and again. They'll lose a little bit of surface characteristic, but you can use them again. I've never had one like disintegrate or break for that matter, but they are plastic. You have two sizes, an upper and lower, but in large and they call it universal, if you like, big and small. Most important thing is they block out the oxygen inhibited layer. So you get a great gloss, a surface that is more color stable, harder. This is a great thing. You only finish the edges. You don't have to touch and polish them up. You might use a finishing strip incidentally. And it's great. You can layer, and I came up with a protocol for them and why I like them, because if you're going to do veneers and things like that, you want them to look as natural as possible. So the advantages are the one visit. Like anything, there's a learning curve, but it's not a bad one, like I had perhaps with a silicone putty technique. It's repeatable, it's simple, once mastered. That's a biggie. No lab costs. That'll pay for itself quite quickly, the kit. It's great. This is the reason I love them, for the single veneer. How difficult is it for a single veneer? You get the wrong color. You may have put your tri-in paste. You still get it wrong. Who pays for it when it's bonded in or it's wrong? And it can lead to friction amongst the patient, the dentist, the technician. Who pays for remakes? Great, you don't have to polish them. Saves time. And I said that the enhanced physical properties. Easily repaired and renewed. So that you can use them again and again. So if they go over the failure of the composite, rather than the U veneer, over a time, just replace them. Think about that also, about time to do the procedure as well. I would say you save a bit of time, but you've only got one visit. There is a time element. But I think that one of the advantages is, how often have you fitted a beautiful set of veneers, or even one veneer, and over a couple of years or less, sometimes longer, the margin shows. Patient comes in unhappy. Don't have that problem with a veneer, just do another. Cut it back and redo it. So I think you charge less. I don't mind talking money. Charge a couple of £100 for a veneer. Depends where you are. I know I'm in Salford, and patients will pay it. Happy. It's, you know what, I would be paying probably around 50%, you know, for what I would charge for a veneer. So there are disadvantages. I think multiple units are demanding. Yeah, I'll agree with that. I have done them, and I'll show you a case where I did a couple, but you know, I think if you're doing 3 to 3, you might want to think about porcelain. The wear is composite you're using, so yeah, it'll wear incisively, buccally, it'll stain therefore. But so will your normal restorations that you're doing composite in any case. I think porcelain can last sometimes years. We know that. Ceramics, you know, they're ever improving. Emacs, they're all great materials, and you know what we can do with these materials nowadays. So yeah, I'm not going to argue. Porcelain will probably last longer, even allowing for the margins perhaps showing. That's a problem. They've recently, and I'll show you that they've recently tried to address that, but I'll come back to that at the end. And never forget your patient. If they come in and they tell you they want porcelain veneers or ceramic veneers in specific, don't argue with them. You can discuss alternatives, but if it goes wrong, they'll throw it in your face. So just be aware of that. I'm a great believer in giving the patient what they want. And here's the second case I ever did. And it was an orthodontic cry for help. I thought, oh my goodness me, how am I going to restore that? The translucency alone, I thought, how many remakes am I going to have? Oh, I've just got my veneer kit. Let's give it a go. A lot of people will say, should you prep or not to prep? That is the question. Sounds Shakespearean. Nowadays, we started with veneers years ago, no prep. And then people, we're going to prep. And now we've got these luminaires and things, don't prep. We don't need to prep. I prep. Why? You can see on this slide, you get an increased surface area. You get down to fresh enamel, which is easier, better bonds. So if you're sticking composite to a tooth, it's still minimally invasive. It's minuscule. Why not? You're never going to get that composite off again, providing you're not going through into the dentine. Why not prep it? I just don't buy that. Provided you're not, you know, doing this minimal amount prep. You know. So I etch. Gosh, the dam was going to get in the way. I'm not using dam, even with floss ties. And a cure, wrong angle, but there you go. Really for demonstration. 01 and TN I chose. Here's what you do. You get your veneer, having chosen the size. It's not difficult, there's 2. You get that highly translucent. I told you I'd find a use for it. I put a little blob in the bottom. And onto it, you blob in some of the enamel. And you flatten it down with your flat plastic, then cover it, a bit like Blue Peter. You put it, I'll use it later, for those who remember Blue Peter. Put it over the top with a box or into a drawer, put it aside. And then literally after you've etched and bonded your enamel surface, splodge it on. Pretty rough, flatten it down a bit. Then take it out of your veneer out, and that's it, done. If you're not worried about gingival health and getting gingival bleeding, take off the excess there and then. Much easier. So, you know, if your gingival health is good, just wick it away. You've got to be quick with these things, and particularly when I'm doing photographs, because the light will set it, the surgery light, or even the natural light. And that's it, just done. Immediately after I remove the veneer. Pretty garbage, you think? Okay, that's it. Say hello, that's the burr. Nothing else was used on this case. You could use finishing strips, got no problem with that, using interdental finishing strips. Whatever you like, the metal ones you can use now, 3M, but you know, it's up to you. And a result, well, I nearly fell off my chair because I thought, yeah, that's good. The translucency, I could never really have got that with easily with veneers, or I would have gone back at least a few times. So I was happy. More important, patient was happy. Second case. Oops, let's go back. I look after a drug and alcohol unit. So there's some discolored composite, yuck. But I'm making a denture as well, but patient wasn't happy with that. Well, I'm not going to use porcelain. No, the crack in the lateral. He wanted something doing, so I thought, I've got this kit. It's the first case I've done. Let's have a go. So I've chosen it. And the only reason I show this case is that I finished it afterwards. I let it set. It's much easier to take it off. But if you're worried about gingival bleeding, then you can take it off afterwards around the margin if necessary. Natural look afterwards, patient happy. Very easy to do these things. So you think porcelain gives the best. And as I go through that, patient didn't like that porcelain veneer. Not surprised, the colour, it really did stand out. So you cut it off and you've got to think laterally here. Okay, I've got composite, got tooth. Do I care? No. Why? Just aerobraid. I'm happy to leave what's underneath. Chosen my veneer and my colours, and I etched. I bonded. And I cured. Probably better curing angle. I put in my little translucent at the bottom. You're getting the idea now. It's a sandwich. The composite, put it aside. Splodge on my dentin composite. And I flattened it down. You're getting the idea of the protocols now. And I put it on. And oh yes, I was worried. There. Colour. You can see it now with the veneer on. It does not look good. And after I already committed, it was too yellow in this vicinity. Was not happy. So what you do, cut it back a bit, put another layer on. That's why I like it. If you've got problems with colour, you just put another layer on. Take the veneer off. You'll all say, God, that's awful. That's all I used. Didn't need to polish everything. All done. Happy patient. Looks more natural. But yes, you could use your aligners and everything else, but the patient wasn't into that. She just wanted something natural. And 3 years down the line, yeah, it's done what composite does. I haven't done anything. The patient's happy to do, but you can see it will lose surface texture. It will, you know, it will become smooth with brushing. You've got a bit of stain there. And sure, in time, when it's discolored a bit more and stained a bit more, we'll cut it back and put another layer on. But I haven't got a problem if there's recession or the margin shows. Just redo it. It's much easier than taking off porcelain veneers, because that is the biggest problem when you're down to enamel, when you're through to dentine and everything else. So there are issues there. So here we go. I had her permission to show her face. I like to give reality. 2 centrals, pretty discolored, decided, go on, I'll have a go. I'm not sure I would have done this retrospectively, but anyway, I chose my 2 veneers, and it really is just to show you, as I go through these quite quickly after prep, Same routine each time I'm doing, and I'm bonding and I'm etching and I prepped and I put my light and go through the whole thing. It's just the same thing, one on top of the other. It's just a protocol. As I say, it's easily repeatable. And put on my composite, pat it down, and I've done one. Take it, after curing it, see, just finished it, and that's the point. Do one, and then do the next. So finish it off, and then turn your attention, and then there it is after I've done both. Final job, patient happy, done, dusted, thought I was good. No, it wasn't any good. She didn't like it. Here, it's discolored. She really wasn't happy. If that would have been a veneer, you know, when you put your veneer on, you've tried it and it looks good and you push it down or whatever, and you think, oh crikey, the colour coat shows up. There's a bit of that, you know, she wasn't happy. Dead easy, aerobraid away. And a few of it went a lot deeper than I thought. And I bonded it. And then I used my opaquer out of my Amaris kit. And if you put opaquers on and then put your composites back, yes, I had to polish. And that's the reason the discoloration went right through the tooth. It really did. And so we did get a happy patient eventually. So there I am with the opaquer I talked about, which is in your Amaris kit. And just so you can use opaquers over the whole surface of that tooth. And that was that central done. So I used an opaquer right over it. It was quite dark, even darker than it looks in that photograph. And I said to you, they've got some new kits. These are not even available in the UK yet. Uveneer extras, and they come in different shapes, and they've got a bit more surface texture, and you know, they're expanding the range. But I would just go for the basic kit if I was starting off. And here we are, strange world I've been into in the last year, seen two of geothermal areas, and probably #1 and 2 in the world, both in New Zealand and the USA in the past 12 months. We are on a different planet, aren't we? Anyway, so what's air abrasion? Is it the name of an airline? No, that's if there are any airlines left. Nor is it air polishing. And it's important to separate these terms out. What is air polishing? Well, it's using water and air under a stream of air and applying it to the tooth. And you're using non-abrasive powders. Now, sodium bicarb, glycine is in the amino acid. You've got sodium phosphosilicate. The important thing about sodium phosphosilicate, it's not soluble. And it's under a proprietary name, Novamin. And it gets even more complicated if you're using it with one of the machines, one of the companies, Velapex, their Aquacare. It actually comes under the name of Silk. And you use these powders and you slurry them onto the surface of the tooth to remove, I use the word extrinsic stain, superficial stain. And probably the market leader is EMS Air Polisher. I think it is available at Optident. Great machine, no problem with it. Good for hygienists to use. Okay. So what's sandblasting? Well, it's where you're using an abrasive powder, aluminium oxide, and I would say use it in 50 micron. And you apply your compressed air to the surface, using it dry, and it takes away, can take away stain, but it roughens the surface. Use it off and on, crowns to re-cement them, or inlays, you know, and you can get back to that nice matte gold surface on a gold inlay, for example. It takes away all the oxides and layers, and it improves your bonding. And it's a simple, great machine. I bought it back from the States, from Denmark when they used to sell it. I don't think they sell it anymore, but at the time they did. And I bought it back from the United States, and I was one of the first kids on the block, if you like, to have it. And it really was a very important part of my dentistry messy. You can't cut with it. And there was the Danville micro etching. You can still get it today. Very easy. Put it on your airline, even if you're an associate. It's cheap. It's a cheap machine. All you need is the powder, and it really enhances the bonding, and you can get rid of some stain with this, a little more, but it will abrade away as opposed to the air polisher. But I don't need this anymore because I'm using air abrasion. And it's just a matter of course, because if you went long enough with your sandblaster, although it goes over a larger area and it's using a powder and it's not as powerful, it will produce, if you like, a less accurate beam, if you like, of the powder, and it will cut away much more slowly, but it will abrade away eventually, but you'd never use it for cutting the cavity. Okay, not a sandblaster. But this is just a matter of using smaller nozzle, 29 micron powder. You can use it dry, just like sandblaster, you can use it wet. So the machines allow you to do others. You can buy a Prep Start, it's just dry, or you can use the Prep Start H2O. I think those are through by Danville, they're good, or Velopex. You can just choose what you want to use it, wet or dry. And it cuts away, and this is the point, biological or non-biological material. And you just apply it to a tooth. And so you get this is one I favour, one I use. It used to be called the AquaCut, now they've revamped it, it's the AquaCare. And you can buy even a single punnet version. And in one of them, I'll put my air polishing type material, and the other, I've got my aluminium oxide cutter. You can just flick a switch, so it's very easy to use. And it uses 29 micron powder. Use it dry or wet. Different noise, so you haven't got the vibration of an air rotor. And it's less destructive than an air rotor, so it doesn't cut away as quickly. So you've got perhaps a bit more finesse. You often don't need a local. And you can use it like a sandblaster to take away all the oxide layers and everything else and help stick back your crowns if they ever come out, or your inlays and onlays. And you can cut away at composite, ionomer, cements, but not ceramics, amalgams, or metals. You're just rough on the surface, you won't cut them away. But you can cut enamel and dentine with it. And I talk about micro and macro retention. Macro retention is making big holes. So you're doing grooves, cuts, so enhancing the surface area. Micro retention is literally by the blasting of the little holes that are produced by your aluminium oxide, okay? And then if you acid etch and bond as well, you further increase the retention. Your restorations don't drop out. Great practice builder, no air rotor involved. And if you fail with Icon, I showed you Icon and it doesn't work, well, or you're doing air polishing and you think, oh, well, it's an extrinsic stain, but it's not. Well, just flick the switch, air abrade it away and restore it with composite. Still minimally invasive. Superficial carious lesions, easy to take away. And this is the big thing. And I'm going to cost you a lot of money today for those of you in NHS practice. If you want something that's going to alter from 1 UDA to 3 UDAs, buy one. Because then, when you seal, you don't get your 1 UDA for a fissure seal, you're cutting a tooth, effectively you're making a small cavity, 3 UDAs. And that is fact, okay? Some people debate, oh, well, yes, no. You're not doing a fissure sealant. It's an occlusal sealant restoration. You can use it with these different powders as well, the soluble ones. And I would say that if you're using silk, you can actually put it onto a root surface and it will help with sensitivity, but you'd have to give a local. Glycine is the gold standard if you're doing periodontal surgery, or sodium bicarb solution, because after you finish your surgery, you should wash your root surface before putting your flat back. And that's what many a periodontists will do. If you're cleaning crowns and in the surgery using it dry, get one of those things for goodness sake, because the powder does go everything. Just get a little chamber. They're about 100 quid. And I was using this a long, long time. Those Lactona loops, you get them 2.5, 4 or 6. Henry Schein. Why are you spending thousands of pounds? And particularly now we're all having to wear visors with COVID-19. That's the way I've always practiced surgical masks. Will I have to put an FP2 or N95 or FFP3? Who knows? But you've got to protect yourself, protect your eyes. You won't get a pneumoconiosis by inhaling it over a period of, the small amounts we're using it. They haven't had a major problem with people using bauxite, but you don't want loads of dust in, and I suppose they would use respirators of some idea for your minor. It's messy. With water, you get sludge, perhaps cuts slower. Powder gets everywhere. So with this patient, she didn't like her composite. We aerobraided away. It produces a funnel cut. That's just to show you the cut. If you just put it in one position in a second, it's done that or less. And then if you kind of groove it out, and you can see how it will have gone up and down, and then just get your flat plastic, turn it, and it's a bit like extracting roots. You'll often find the composite comes out. You're not going to take away stained dentine, are you? It's not soft. Put your acid, bond, play around with your composite, and restore. And I played around with darker composites and get something that's reasonable. It wasn't ideal, this one, but the patient was happy enough. Got rid of those black marks. It was her main concern. Is the caries in that fissure? I don't know. What have you got at your disposal? Let's go through it. Got a probe. Radiographs. How many times have you looked at a radiograph, think, oh, there's caries there. I can see a shadow gone in and there's nothing. Or vice versa. You don't think there's anything there and you open that suspect fissure and you kind of fall into it with your air rotor. There's a massive cavity. You go back to your x-ray and you think, wow. You've got caries stain. Who uses it? It's not always guaranteed to work. And similarly, you've got these fancy Diagnodent and lasers, and they've got better, but they still give you 90-odd%, according to them, reliability. Maybe that's 80. I just don't get why you wouldn't open it up. So there is the fissure. Just open it. Hold it a couple of millimeters beyond the surface and just, you'll get used to it. You kind of move very, very slightly, holding off the surface, but it's not in contact. That's the important thing. And you'll get see, I use it dry, terrible mess. And think about, as you're doing this, you've got macro retention, you've got the micro retention of the aluminium powder, you've got your acid etch, you've got your bond, your fissures, and I use this word lightly, will never come out. And there I used a flowable GSO flow. Grandioso, cured it just to show you that I was using the light, and then you've done it. And I wasn't sure here. Is the caries there? 2 seconds. I've opened it up. That shows, what we're doing. Time's going on, so I'm going through a little quicker than I would like. They do, if you get your mirror in the wrong angle, they'll fog it and you have to replace it. You can't just wipe that off. It's abraded away. And if you find that in 2 seconds of abrading away, what are you going to do? Give a local and use one of those. So in those cases where you're not sure, or you thought it was going to be okay, and we just restored it in Grandioso. And I put in for once it was so deep, I put in a liner, a glass ionomer. One of my staff decided to get married, so that's what I did. I took all the staff to the wedding in Cyprus. A little bit to finish off with about finance. This lady influenced me in the same way Gordon Christensen influenced me more than any other person in clinical. Jennifer de St. George, originally from Bolton, but made it big in the United States, had her own school there, trained dentists and their staff. She's lectured in every continent, probably bar the Arctics. And the other guy's David Hexter. And David is one of the leaders of the International Academy of Dental Facial Aesthetics, and very kindly made me a fellow. And I go to this meeting to find out what's new in aesthetic dentistry and rub shoulders with some of the big names in aesthetic dentistry. And our regent is actually none other than Prof. Eddie Lynch, who many of you will know. But Jenny taught me, and I thought I knew it all. In 1990, newly opened a practice. I got it from a squat. In 3 months, I was full-time. I thought I knew it all. Jenny rewrote everything. I saw her at a BDA annual convention. And she taught me more. But two things I always say with Jenny, and these are two things and she taught me, and I still keep in contact with this lady today. Patients question the fee when they question the quality. And isn't that so true? Never let that sentence leave you. When they start moaning about the price, providing you're living in the real world, as, you know, they won't mind paying 200 quid for a U veneer. They won't mind paying a little extra if you're using enamel and dentin composites. Sell benefits. And she was ahead of her time in a world of litigation, pre-litigation era I come from. Inform before you perform, no surprises. Doesn't just refer to financial, but the procedure you're doing. But she was ahead of the game, and those were ingrained into me from a very early stage in my career. And Jeremy's own pearl, you've got to be confident. You've got to look at people in the eye. You've got to talk to them. And the fiscal drag, I love this one. How many of you will admit to it? This is going to cost you 240. It seems to go from here to here. You begin, how many of you? And I can see one or two, you're probably smiling. Yeah, it happens to me sometimes. It's going to cost you yeah. And you think it doesn't come out. Try and keep that coming out of here. But never forget this one. I often will say to people in good old, and I'm talking to a UK audience, double glazing advert, you buy one, you get one free. Well, that's true. I'll often do 2 or 3 abstractions and I'll say, oh, I can see that the upper 2 needs doing as well. Do you know what? I'm going to do it. Have it on me. Patients like a good deal. It makes them trust you more. It makes them feel that you aren't just all about money. It makes them look at value. I don't mind the word selling. In America, they have treatment coordinators often, not so much in the UK. But if you think your staff are better at educating, ethical selling, whatever you want to call it, Ashalata, ethical selling, I've got no problem in your staff helping that, explaining it afterwards, taking them into another room. But if it comes naturally to you, you're going to do it yourself. And get over this. And I should alter this slide and shouldn't put impression tray, I put scanner as well. You don't have to be financially underachieving. You can be earning more. You've got no lab fees. You're doing multiple. You can certainly earn as much as you would do for the time you're doing your prep. And time again, I'll use the word time. Never forget time's your asset. Not the quality of the materials you're using, your initial outlay for an air abrasion unit. I promise you, get an air abrasion unit. It'll cost you a couple of grand for that big one. Pay for itself, I reckon, in 2 weeks. I am unusual. I understand what a lot of you listening to this lecture who say you don't understand. One, I'm in an economic area that will rival any of yours. I'm in Salford, in an inner city with a high caries rate. My patients aren't the most affluent. I use it every day, and I am unusual because I still have an NHS contract. It's a choice, it's a personal choice I want to put back in society. That's just a personal thing. So I use this, and it achieves my UDAs. And my sealants don't drop out. And I go back to one of the things I showed you last time about Manchester United. And I talk about music, I talk about football and cars and anything else. Get homed in, holidays, anything with your patients, because when you talk about other things, they buy you. They don't buy the dentistry. People buy people. And I can't, you know, if you're not natural at it, go and learn with Chris Barrow or Ashley Latter and people like that. Get into it, and then all these treatments where you say they'll never buy it, I can't sell it, because I think it's important, because your conditions, and I'm going to finish my presentation in a second with just one last thing, and it's over to my friend here, because if you don't, there you go. Maybe that will happen. No, in all seriousness, it's been a pleasure to lecture in very strange circumstances. I'll agree, it's very unusual for me without a live audience, but the way that our patients are going to behave differently, we're going to behave differently. Are you going to eat out as much and everything else? I think this is probably more and more webinars are going to be the way forward. I know they existed before, but I think much more. I'd like to say thank you. And I believe that someone's going to take away my presentation now. And I will just say one final thing. My email is jeremycooper@jeremycooper.co.uk. I know I've got quite a number of questions and comments, so I think I will do that. I know I've run over time, but we've got time for questions, and I thought I'd like to go through. So I'm just going to escape and have a look at some of those questions now and see if I can go through them. If not suck down, what other method? I mean, you're going to use a suck down technique. Okay. Just use the silicone putty and cut it in two with a scalpel. It's just the same. You get the same result, because how many of us have one of those plastic machines that you put on your models? I don't. But as I said to you, I just don't do it. Full stop. I don't use that technique. Somebody's asked about 3M Filtech. Brilliant. Brilliant material. Can't fault it. I used 3M Filtech for decades. I was only introduced with Voco because I was doing a lecture actually on air abrasion, and I was asked, would I talk about composite? They were sponsoring a lecture. So why do I use Voco products? Probably more, still have Filtech. I like 3M's products for cementation. I use Unicem 2 and Ultimate. I like them. I use 3M Universal for sticking those things in. But I actually like the handling of Voco. I don't know about the price. I genuinely do not know about what I pay for Filtech, what I would pay for Voco products, and I pay for them because it doesn't matter. It does not matter to me. My manager will get those. It wouldn't alter what I do, even if they're more expensive, because pro rata, it's a minuscule part of the fee or the amount of composite you're using. The air abrasion unit is Velapex. They used to make those little, or those before when film, a bit like Kodak, they were king, certainly in this country. Periomat was another, but Velapex were king of the automatic X-ray processor. It killed them overnight. Digital radiography killed them. They had to find something else. So, like good dentists, if we can only see a few patients a day, goodness knows what we're all going to do. But they moved over and they went into air abrasion, and it's now their number one focus. And so I would say to you, it's Velapex AquaCare, it's called. You can buy a single one. I won't waste your money. I buy the double, pay more, because you can use it for removal of staining. And buy it out of your own pocket. But I'm an associate. Get over it. Buy one. You will make money because you can just use it all the time. And so much of the time, genuinely, I don't need a local. If it is sensitive, and there will be times it will be, then okay, give a local. Thank you. Next, do you use PTFE? Good point. PTFE tape is great. Use it interdentally. It's easier if you're so easy inclined. I suppose it comes out of habit. I've used matrix strips from I was a dental baby. So yeah, PTFE tape is easier, no problem. If you want to use PTFE tape, I bow down to you, it's probably a lot easier to manage and cheaper, you know, plumber's tape or whatever you want to call it. Virgin teeth, never, ever use it to whiten, you know. I'd say never, wrong word, never. When would I use it? When I failed with whitening. You know yourself, no matter how long you're whitening, some of those stains, we don't see much of tetracycline staining now, do we? But if those stains aren't going to go and the patient's not happy about it, then okay, you might go to composite. But always, always begin with whitening if that's the problem. Always find out if your patient wants whitening. You're obviously going to whiten first before you do a veneer if the patient wants whitening. So inform before you perform. So find out, do they want whitening? It's no good, and always tell them, but when you put your composite on, it's not going to change color afterwards. How many times have you made that mistake? You make it a few times, you never make it again. Is that a big bottle? It's actually a bottle that somebody bought, the massive bottle. I'm obsessed with whiskey, and you may be aware, part of the whiskey appreciation side, there's a Facebook group, a dental appreciation, whiskey appreciation group. Somebody's asked about the massive bottle of whiskey it was bought from the 60th, but to be honest, it's Chivas Regal. I'm unlikely to drink it anyway. I like my malt whiskies. I'm obsessed with that and look out. We will be doing some whiskey and dentistry courses up in Scotland. Because I'm obsessed with whiskey as I am with dentistry. How do you bond composite to composite? Aerobrade. Do you need to, if you're just bonding to composite, don't use your acid etch. One of the reasons, don't use it. Sometimes it'll even stain the composite, particularly the blue etches, you know, they get in the way. If you're just doing composite on composite, and you've got no enamel, then I would just aerobrade and then wash it all off, careful washing it off to get all that powder off, and then use your bonding agent and then put your composite. And you know, it's important to say that even if you're using wet air abrasion, you still have to wash it off. I mentioned about that, it just cuts slower. LED light, Premium Plus, look them up. Just Google it, you'll find them. They're really, really excellent lights, and I've got them, and I would not use anything. I wouldn't spend the money. If you've got money to burn, a Velo, and I certainly wouldn't buy one if you've got a Velo. Velo are, you know, I think undisputed champion. Mine's just a cheaper version, and no, you can't drop it. And the thing I do like about it, it's got built into the charging unit, it's got something to test, but with LED lights, they don't go in the same way as the old lights. So that, yes, you should test it from time to time, but they do last for a long time. An air polisher, if you get a Velopex, you don't need your air polisher anymore, because if you've got the two tubs, you go from your air polisher with a turn of the handle. Why do you want more clustering up? But if you're a hygienist, you can't cut teeth. So if you've got an air polisher, give it to your hygienist. She can't abrade away teeth. Therapists can, but she couldn't do it. Bonding system, don't have one bond, and I don't want to repeat myself too much from the previous lecture, but go and listen to it. But effectively, one bottle, because I haven't got time to start using multiple bonds, but those multiple bonds, the old multiple bottles, whether it's your Real IXs, your Bisco, you know, they're a massive name, certainly internationally in bonding. You may get increased bonding strength. They've got these MDP now, you know, special bonds for zirconia and everything. You know, they want to make money out of you, but it may enhance your bond a bit. But to be honest, I'm using one bottle systems most of the time. And I think that is very important, to use a bonding agent for different things. So perhaps have some dual cure bonds, like I mentioned, Futura Bond U, and some single bonds. Great. Steps for posterior composites. I talked a little bit last time. You can use, I think a lot of time people are using flowables now. Do I use flowables under my composites in the boxes? No. Yeah, people say it's easier perhaps to get less voids. Maybe. Using Viscalor, which is one of these warming composites, which is now, it almost goes in like a flowable, and then, you know, as it cools down, you can pack it. So that's, and it's a bulk film. So that's a product I talked about last time. And do you use PTFT? Yeah, great stuff. I've got no, with a veneer. Yeah, you can use these clear matrix strips beyond your veneer. No problem at all, you know, but PTFE tape, absolutely, probably a lot easier. I also like to pull the matrix strip through to get rid of excess. So I move it backwards and forwards on the mesial and distal. So that's one of the reasons I do use. And if I do a hands-on with you, I can pull through the tape to pull away the excess over, you know, of the composite to reduce the amount of excess mesial and distally. I know with all the pictures, probably too many, but I think with the first one, I went over and over. It's the same protocols, and maybe that's, I will accept. I should cut some of the stages out of that, but it's repeating it again and again. It's trying to get it ingrained into your brains. Wet and dry air abrasion, somebody's asked the differences. Wet, they say, the manufacturers will tell you, oh, it's no difference in the cutting. It is. My staff will tell you that. But if I try to use it wet, and it's so much more fiddly, changing the extra bits, and it makes them more money. But dry goes everywhere. Wet will reduce the amount of dust everywhere and less mess. So your nurses will like you using it wet, but it cuts slower, and it's more fiddly changing the bits. And because I'd used air abrasion and I brought it back from the United States with previous United States models, if you like, the first generation, although, believe it or not, air abrasion goes back to the 1950s, appeared before the air rotor, died a death when the air rotor came along. So SSY produced a machine in the 1950s, but, you know, I like to use it dry. It cuts quicker, no doubt in my mind. And, you know, they can say what they like, but I know. Wedging systems, I use so many different ones, actually. You know, often I've bought, I have lots of wedges, plastic wedges, but I still use the wooden ones. Sometimes I like the wooden because they kind of give, don't they, as you push them in. Yeah, they'll break, but I use different wedges. I use plastic, I use metal, wood, you know, the old wizard wedges. So I will use whatever I need. Sometimes I'll use one as appropriate to another. I haven't used BioClear Matrix. I hold my hands. I know it's something on my to-do list. You can't use everything or buy everything, but everybody likes BioClear. I've heard very good reports about it. And I keep thinking, yeah, I should do that. I mean, I've tried all the Garrisons. I've tried, you know, V3s. I always find a bit wider embrasures, I get excess. And I showed last time Aztec's Curve. So I find them a lot easier to use, but I've got no problems about using matrices if they're nicely wedged in. And thank you. Partial matrix and rubber dam. Any tips? Yeah, I too, with those partial matrix. You're talking about the little, I remember when they first came onto the market, I think it was 3M who produced them. And yeah, they're very good in small cavities, fine. But when they get larger, there are larger and larger, these matrices, and some of the gods of dentistry I've seen use them, and I think, well, why don't they get excesses? I do. And you know, where you got tags over the top and all the rest of it, I've tried them. I even bought some and sent them back thinking it's my failing. Why is it they always get great results, whereas I find that I get excesses and they're a pain in the neck to get those overhangs off? I find that the Aztec Curve gets me out of so much jail. That is a matrix band. I'm not bothered about cost. I don't even know what they cost, but they're not. They're better than the, in my view, the Ultradent Omnimatrix, because they don't fall apart when you tighten them too much. And, you know, you use them, throw them away, but you get that curved, contact point like a natural tooth. But I still have the straight ones for certain situations. So yeah, try those Aztec innovations. And I can't imagine they're much more expensive than using a normal little curved matrix. And there were pictures say, and I think at that point, I think I've answered most of those questions, and I hope you've all enjoyed it. And please let Paul know if you do. And I'd like to say thank you, and I hope that I try to live in the real world. And thank you very much for some of your comments. It's been very gratifying to know. And I'd like to say thank you and cheerio, and be safe. Bye-bye.